Daniel chapter 11. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will stand up in Persia, and the 4th will be far richer than all of them. When he has grown strong through his riches, he will stir up against the realm of Greece. A mighty king will stand up, who will rule with great dominion and do according to his will. When he stands up, his kingdom will be broken and will be divided toward the 4 winds of the sky, but not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom will be plucked up even for others beside these. The king of the south will be strong. One of his princes will become stronger than him and have dominion. His dominion will be great. At the end of years they will join themselves together, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she will not retain the strength of her arm. He will also not stand, nor will his arm. But she will be given up with those who brought her, and he who became the father of her, and he who strengthened her in those times. But out of a shoot from her roots, one will stand up in his place, who will come to the army and will enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and will deal against them and will prevail. He will also carry their goods with their molten images and with their goodly vessels of silver and of gold captive into Egypt. He will refrain some years from the king of the north. He will come into the realm of the king of the south, but he will return into his own land. His sons will wage war and will assemble a multitude of great forces, which will come on and overflow and pass through. They will return and wage war even to his fortress. The king of the south will be moved with anger, and will come out and fight with him, even with the king of the north. He will send out a great multitude, and the multitude will be given into his hand. The multitude will be lifted up, and his heart will be exalted. He will cast down tens of thousands, but he won't prevail. The king of the north will return, and will send out a multitude greater than the former. He will come on at the end of times, even of years, with a great army and with much substance. In those times many will stand up against the king of the south. Also the children of the violent among your people will lift themselves up and establish the vision, but they will fall. So the king of the north will come and cast up a mound and take a well-fortified city. The forces of the south won't stand, neither will his chosen people, neither will there be any strength to stand. But he who comes against him will do according to his own will, and no one will stand before him. He will stand in the glorious land, and destruction will be in his hand. He will set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and with him equitable conditions. He will perform them. He will give him the daughter of women to corrupt her, but she will not stand and won't be for him. After this, he will turn his face to the islands and will take many, but a prince will cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Yes, moreover, he will cause his reproach to turn on him. Then he will turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and won't be found. Then one who will cause a tax collector to pass through the kingdom to maintain its glory will stand up in his place. But within a few days he will be destroyed, not in anger and not in battle. In his place a contemptible person will stand up, to whom they had not given the honor of the kingdom, but he will come in time of security and will obtain the kingdom by flatteries. The overcoming forces will be overwhelmed from before him and will be broken, yes, also the prince of the covenant. After the treaty made with him, he will work deceitfully, for he will come up and will become strong with a small people. In time of security he will come even on the fattest place of the province. He will do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He will scatter among them prey, plunder, and substance. Yes, he will devise his plans against the strongholds, even for a time. He will stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south will wage war in battle with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he won't stand, for they will devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of his dainties will destroy him, and his army will be swept away. Many will fall down slain. As for both of these kings, their hearts will be to do mischief, and they will speak lies at one table, but it won't prosper. For the end will still be at the appointed time. Then he will return into his land with great wealth. His heart will be against the holy covenant, he will take action and return to his own land. He will return at the appointed time and come into the south, but it won't be in the latter time as it was in the former. For ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be grieved and will return and have indignation against the holy covenant and will take action. He will even return and have regard to those who have forsake the holy covenant. Forces will stand on his part, and they will profane the sanctuary, even the fortress, and will take away the continual burnt offering. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. He will corrupt those who do wickedly against the covenant by flatteries. But the people who know their God will be strong and take action. Those who are wise among the people will instruct many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder many days. Now, when they fall, they will be helped with a little bit, but many will join themselves to them with flatteries. Some of those who are wise will fall, to refine them and to purify and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for the time appointed. The king who will do according to his will, he will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and will speak marvelous things against the God of gods. He will prosper until the indignation is accomplished, for that which is determined will be done. He won't regard the gods of his fathers, or the desire of women, or regard any god, for he will magnify himself above all. But in his place he will honor the God of fortresses. He will honor a God whom his fathers didn't know, with gold, silver, precious stones, and pleasant things. He will deal with the strongest fortresses by the help of a foreign god. He will increase with glory whoever acknowledges him. He will cause them to rule over many and will divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south will contend with him, and the king of the north will come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. He will enter into the countries and will overflow and pass through. He will enter into the glorious land, and many countries will be overthrown. But these will be delivered out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He will also stretch out his hand on the countries. The land of Egypt won't escape, but he will have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. The Libyans and the Ethiopians will be at his steps. But news will come out of the east, and out of the north will trouble him. And he will go out with great fury to destroy and utterly to sweep away many, but will plant the tents of his palace between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. Well, I think this is just a confusing chapter. It's not 100% confusing. There are things we know about this chapter. And but reading commentators, golly, the things that they say. So there are 3 chapters, Daniel chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12, which are all part of one visionary experience that Daniel gets from this angel. So the angel turns up, and then the angel is going to reveal to him a vision of everything that will happen in the end. This is not the end of the world. This is the end of the old covenant, or the end of the age of when the Lord's only dealing with Jews, and he's now going, and after that, he will deal with everyone. And so these are all the things that are going to happen. Maybe not all of the things, but there's a lot of things here that are going to happen from the time of Daniel right through to basically the time of Jesus. And what happened is, right at the start of this vision, we can recognize that it's talking about Alexander the Great. It talks about this great king that's going to arise, but his kingdom will be given up to 4 people for the 4 corners of the earth. Well, that's Alexander the Great, and his kingdom was split into 4 between his 4 generals, and they get a kingdom each. And then it starts talking about the king of the south and the king of the north over and over and over again. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. And it sounds like it's talking about this one guy, but it's not. The king of the south is the Ptolemy Empire, and the king of the north is the Seleucid Empire. And so when Alexander the Great splits up his kingdom into 4, well, he died, and it split into 4. It was a process that took about 10 years, but eventually it ended up in the hands of Cassander. Is it Lysimachus? Ptolemy and Seleucus. And these 4 had their own 4 kingdoms. Well, in this chapter, the south is Egypt. And that's where Ptolemy was. And the kingdom of the north is actually not in the north. It's actually kind of like northeast of Egypt, and that's Syria, and that's Seleucus. So right at the beginning, the king of the north is Seleucus, and the king of the south is Ptolemy. But as it goes on, this is describing a whole history from the time of this right through. So the king of the north and the king of the south, they change who they are. So the king of the north is a different person. Every time he dies and there's a new king of the north, it still keeps calling it king of the north, but the people are changing. And it still keeps saying king of the south, but it's different people. So there are experts who know their like intertestamental period of history really well, and they go through this chapter and they can say that, like for example, chapter 4, it says, when he stands up, his kingdom will be broken, divided between the four winds of the sky. Well, that's Alexander the Great, with his four generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. It says the king of the south will be strong, one of his kingdoms will be stronger, and so they start tracing the history of all these different people down, and in the commentators that I read, they say verse by verse by verse, this is this king, this is this king. Now, half of these kings I never heard of before. So, we're all strong at some things, but we all don't know everything, and intertestamental history, I just know basic stuff. And I'm only reading the book of Maccabees now for like the first time in my life. I can't believe I never thought of reading it earlier. And I'm only up to chapter 10. So, I'll be more knowledgeable about all of this in a year's time when we go through the intertestamental period. But anyway, there are people who know it, and they go through these verses saying who all the different people are. We get down to verse 20, for example, it says, then one will cause a tax collector to pass through the kingdom to maintain its glory, but within a few days he'll be destroyed, but not in anger and not in battle. So one of the commentators I was reading said, the king was Seleucus IV, and he sent his chief minister through the land to collect temple taxes, but instead, he ended up dying. So there are people who are like able to identify all the different figures as you go through, but you can see in chapter 20, the king of the north is now Seleucus IV. So not Seleucus I, as it would have been at the start. So as you go through. And when we get down to verse 28, it says, then he, so the he keeps changing. It says that then he will return to the land with great wealth. His heart will be against the holy covenant. He will take action and return to his own people. That's like Antiochus IV, trying to force people against the Lord, but force them to be Greek. And in verse 32, it says, he will corrupt those who do wickedly against the covenant by flatteries, but people who know their Lord will be strong and take action. And I can tell you what, the people who knew they were strong was people like Judas Maccabeus, who stood up and fought, which is where we get the Hanukkah feast from. So we go through all of this chapter, and then there comes this moment. And there are references, like for example, there's a reference here in verse 35. It says, those who are wise, what's it say? It says all these things, and then it says, even to the time of the end, for the time is yet to be appointed. Because it mentions the time of the end there, everyone, not everyone, a lot of people start thinking, end of the world. And so I noticed this in the commentators. It's around about here that they start thinking we're now talking about the end of the world and not talking about the intertestamental period. When we went through Daniel chapter 8, it was really obvious. Daniel gets given a vision and he's told it's about the time of the end, but then the vision has its interpretation in the chapter, and all the events that happen in that chapter happen within 200 to 300 years. So the time of the end in Daniel chapter 8 was within 200 to 300 years. It was before Jesus. And that's why I've said it's the end of the Old Covenant. You've got these two periods in history, the period up to the end of the Old Covenant, and then it's the New Covenant. And then the Lord's dealing with everyone, not just with Jewish people. Of course, everyone includes Jewish people. And so this is the same. Now, because I'm not strong on my intertestamental history, I can't tell you every single individual thing that's going on here, but I can tell you one thing. We're not suddenly jumping to the end of the world. That's very, very clear. If we're going to be consistent with Bible interpretation and use the phrases meaning the same thing in every place, or at least use them consistently, at least the way that God's using them, then we're talking about the period like leading up to Jesus and the end of the Old Covenant. We're not suddenly talking about the future. So it says, for example, that there's going to come this king. This is verse 36. He's going to exalt himself above all the gods. And he's going to be someone who loved to build fortresses. I'm pretty sure that's King Herod. Because King Herod thought pretty highly of himself. And he loved to build fortresses. And he built that temple. That temple in Jerusalem was built by King Herod. It was renovated and it was grand. No, that's what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure that this is talking about Herod. In fact, Dr. James Jordan, a commentator that I did consult a bit, he says it's King Herod. So there are a lot of people who think, oh, this is the end of the world. But there are some people that say, no, it's about the end of the Old Covenant. And this isn't the end of the world. This isn't some Antichrist character that's going to appear. This was King Herod. So, the vision's not over. There's one more chapter to go. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. But I'm really vigilant in trying to not get sucked into conspiracy theories. Because conspiracy theories suck up your brain, they suck up your mental bandwidth, they waste your Christian time and your Christian resources. So instead of focusing on the gospel and how to serve the Lord, instead you get focused on the end of the world and Jesus is coming soon, and is Donald Trump the Antichrist? And you start thinking all this type of stuff, and there's a war in Israel. Oh, it must be close now. There's someone I knew who 10 years ago said, they were retirement age, and I said to them, are you getting ready for retirement? And they said, oh no, Jesus is coming back within 1 to 2 years. Just look at what's going on in Israel. I'm not going to retire. Well, that was 10 years ago. And now they've been forced into retirement. And my dad, he became a Christian on the very day in 1967, the Six-Day War. Is it the Six-Day War, 1967? That Israel got attacked by all these other countries. So Israel, to me, is a country. Just like Egypt is a country. Egypt's in the Bible, but Egypt's a country now too. It's not the same thing. Israel is a country now, but it's not the biblical Israel. It's just a country. There's lots of countries in the world. So when a country like, when Russia attacks the Ukraine, we don't suddenly think it's a biblical prophecy being fulfilled. Some people might, and the same with Israel. But when my dad got saved on the eve of the Six-Day War, everyone was telling him, the Lord's going to return any minute. That was 1967. So what is that? 70, 20, that's like 56 years ago? My dad was told, he was a brand new Christian, he was told, you won't even have time to have children. And I've got children. My dad's a great grandfather. And he was told he wouldn't have time to have children. This is what I'm saying. People get caught up in these end-of-the-world conspiracies and they waste their lives. They put all this mental effort into that. And what did Jesus say? When I return, will I find faith? Now, in other words, if he was to suddenly appear right now, he wants to find you not even thinking about all of that, but just about the business of serving him. I don't believe he's going to return right now. But the point of the message today is this chapter is not about the end of the world. So, relax. Lord, I want to thank you for Daniel chapter 11. And I ask that all these end-of-the-world matters that so consume people's hearts and minds, I pray that we'd be able to just relax a bit with it and think about the love of Christ and the gospel. Help us with that, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.